At LucasArts, next-generation gameplay revolves around delivering an experience that people haven't seen before. We want to revolutionize how story and character are portrayed in games, and we want to revolutionize what people can actually do in a game.
The idea of terrain deformation is brilliant. We've all played all sorts of games in all different configurations on a battlefield, but never before have you had the opportunity to actually change the battlefield in real time as you're playing.
We've been big fans of Day One Studios at LucasArts for a long time, and we wanted to work with them, and we talked about a couple of different ideas, and when they came back to us and pitched the idea of doing a future civil war, one that was pitting cybernetics versus genetics, that hook really got us interested. But when they came back and described what you'd be able to do in the game when it comes to terrain deformation, that with the push of a button, you'd be able to change the world around you, we were sold.
Terrain deformation is about manipulating the terrain when you want, how you want, to your tactical advantage or strategic advantage anytime you want.
The evolution of terrain deformation first started as looking for a hook for a action kind of combat mechanic.
I had this idea of being able to screw with a mesh in the terrain and really mess it up and let the player do that and give them that kind of control. And the technical guys, the engineers, kind of went, ah!
It was actually kind of presented to me in a meeting, and they said, well, hey, here's what we're thinking. And after my ears stopped ringing and I got out of the fetal position from underneath my desk and thinking, man, this is something we just can't do. I kind of really, I stepped back and I said, wait a second, this is exactly what we need to be doing.
What Day One has been able to do is come up with technology that fundamentally allows you to change that terrain on the fly in a way that changes your gameplay in a really cool, fun way.
Since we're making a game about a military experience and how terrain deformation is used in a combat environment, I always knew there was one person I wanted to bring in to talk to, and that was Captain Dale Dye.
Hi, Tony. How are you? Dale Dye. Good to meet you, sir.
Captain Dye brings the first-hand experience of being in combat and having to deal with terrain from his service to our country. He's worked on films that dealt with Alexander the Great, with World War II, obviously, with Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers. He's incredibly smart, incredibly passionate, and knows how to communicate. There are a lot of people who obviously have combat experience, but what's special about Captain Dye is he's able to translate that into language that civilians can understand, and more importantly, game developers.
This one has unique capabilities, and I just would love to see you capitalize on it, because it attacks what the infantryman has never been able to attack before, and that's his environment. Everything you do in combat as an infantryman on the ground is really driven by what we call the situation and the terrain. Now, typically, you can do something about the situation, but there's not a damn thing you can do about the terrain. It is what it is, except if you're working with fracture. And that's fascinating to a guy who's had to utilize terrain to stay alive on the ground. That's fascinating. I don't know how many times in my own military experience in combat I've been caught out right in the middle, no place to go and no cover available. And it costs you. But if there were a way when the threat appears that I could just kaboom, and suddenly I would have a piece of cover that I could duck behind very nicely, I mean, that would be magic.
Target is a go.
You can deform terrain, that's fine, but to what extent? Now that you've deformed the terrain, what do? The last thing, in my view, this needs to be, is just run and gun. The last thing you need to give me is just an easy weapon that will take care of any situation that confronts me.
That's where the real challenge comes in, is keeping it at a very fast, high-action clip and, integrating that deformation into it. And I think the other challenge is finding new ways to exploit it, and so that it's not just raising and lowering the terrain, but it is ways, for the player to make cover, ways for it to navigate, ways to do damage, ways to solve puzzles.
Terrain deformation like what we are doing in Fracture hasn't been done before because it's been too complicated for the hardware that's come before this current generation. It just wasn't possible with the processing power that was out there.
The physics interaction really got into really taking advantage of the processing power of these next generation machines, whether it be the Xbox 360 or the PS3, because there's a lot of computation that has to happen to allow all the objects that we get spinning in the world and bouncing around in the world to perform without any hits to frame rate. So it was challenging on almost every level.
AI, graphics, physics, vehicles, multiplayer. It makes everything more challenging, everything more complicated.
The challenges with working with terrain deformation from a design aspect they're huge. You are crafting an experience for the user that the user is going to craft right back at you. So you have to make sure that the goals and the story beats that you want to hit are done in a way that the player has enough flexibility to do what he wants, because I guarantee you he's going to do stuff you never thought of. You can't even count on running down like a path or a valley, because at any time it could be a canyon or a hill. So it's incredibly challenging. You have to think of what this could be as well as what it is while you're creating it.
Other games attempted to do some things like terrain deformation, but we've really taken it where it affects the overall experience in the game, and it really is an integral part of the gameplay. It will raise the bar for all other games. It will raise what people expect interactivity to be in the genre we're in, and in a lot of other genres too.
I think when people actually see the first demo of this game, jaws will drop.